Grandmaster Nightfalls are live starting this week in Destiny 2, and they're being kicked off with Lake of Shadows as the GM, and it also is being accompanied with double loot drops, so you can get double the shards, double the prisms, and double the weapons every run. Speaking of the weapon, the weekly drop is the new Undercurrent Arc Waveframe GL. Now, I'll talk about the elephant in the room, aka this GL versus Forbearance, later in the video, but for now, I'd like to stick to talking about how to efficiently farm for Undercurrent. Speaking of which, this GL has a few good perk options. For column 3, you have the options to use any of Demolitionist, Lead from Gold, or Ambitious Assassin. For column 4, straight to the point, you're going to just want Volt Shot. That's it. It's that simple. Now, some people might say Ambitious Assassin and Volt Shot, but those counter each other. And while, yes, technically it normally does, it barely applies to when you're using a Waveframe. Ambitious will give you an extra shot on your reload, and you have to fire one extra shot to get back to Volt Shot. And really, that's not a big deal at all, at least in my opinion. Now let's start at what you should bring. As always, these guides are for the general player and aimed at making your life easier in these runs. This is not meant for preformed, stacked hardcore teams that are already speedrunning GMs, so just keep that in mind. With that said, I think the most simple and effective composition for this is going to be 1 Warlock and 2 Hunters, or you could also flip it over and do 2 Warlocks and 1 Hunter, but I prefer the former. Your Warlock will be using Cenotaph, shocking, I know, to make you heavy ammo throughout the run, which you will need plenty of if you want to mow through this at a reasonable pace. They also can opt to run Divinity or just a regular Trace Rifle to mark targets. Divinity is not really necessary, but it does make the Tormentor fight in the Nightfall slightly easier if you need it to be. Hunters, I think your best bet will be to split into 1 Solar Hunter and 1 Void Hunter with Tether. The Solar Hunter can rock Shards of Galanor and Dragon's Breath to build an essentially infinite blow-up ignition mechanic in this entire Nightfall and consistently regenerate your super and ignitions throughout the Nightfall. Meanwhile, the Void Hunter can choose to run either Aeons for additional heavy ammo drops or Orpheus Rigs just to consistently have their tether up throughout the Nightfall. For your heavy weapons outside of Dragon's Breath, if you own Apex Predator, you should be using that to your advantage as one of the best rockets in the game, and it also being Solar Surge. Meanwhile, if you're the Warlock and you opted to not use Divinity, you can run Galahorn in your heavy slot for both some crowd control, but also to help anyone running a legendary rocket launcher such as Apex. There isn't a whole lot to say for the beginning of this strike other than try to mark and or finish champions for heavy ammo as you're moving along with the Roomba. Let's move to the first roadblock for people in this GM though, the giant meatball at the end of the Roomba section. This dude has a lot of health. This is probably where most of Nezaric's health pool went, so you're going to need to put in quite a bit of damage. For this portion of the fight, you want to go in with a good chunk of burst damage on the boss, just to get your damage in before being interrupted by several wizard spawns. I'd recommend setting up shop on one of the sides and popping well after damage supers are used on the boss. That way, a well will be up for weapon damage, while also not being up before the wizards spawn in. Once they do spawn in, focus on eliminating them first while your well is still up, because they are incredibly annoying to deal with, and once your well disappears, well, if there's many of them up, you're probably dead. Fusion rifles work great for this if you plan to bring, let's say, a Choke Clip Riptide or the new Strand Fusion from Coil. You could also bring Glacioclasm to match the shield or Cartesian to match the burn, but I feel like given that the entire point of the season is to take advantage of Solar, Radiance, and Ignitions, you should probably have a primary in the energy slot like Sunshot, Zuli's Bane, and so on. Once the wizards are dealt with, you can get back to dunking on the Meatball and just watching out for comically sized Axion darts coming at you. After the Meatball is defeated, you're probably pretty low on ammo, at least for the heavy slot. But luckily for you, this sewer section before you get to the Dam of Hell has a few yellow bar enemies for you to farm heavy ammo from. Speaking of the Dam section, you'll be greeted with 2 yellow bar Phalanx Cabal, who have the strongest shields in the world. You can make heavy ammo off of them as well. After dealing with those, I'd recommend focusing on the Thresher out front. Small tip, 2 Dragon's Breath rockets and some primary shots seem to do the trick to down one, which is a pleasant surprise. So move along the bridge once you do that, and you'll be met with a second Thresher. Same plan applies here, just down it. Once both of those are gone, you'll be dealing with the end section of the bridge, which has 4 yellow bar enemies to deal with. 2 Phalanxes, 1 Unstoppable Champion, and 1 yellow bar that looks like he's out shopping at Walmart. Farm up heavy ammo on these guys as well before continuing forward. Skipping a bit ahead, let's talk about the Tormentor fight. Simply put, this is a test of burst damage. You want to get in, break his arms, and then unload damage into his chest to get him down as soon as possible while also being surrounded by Acolyte Eyes. The eyes are pretty much a non-factor if you're in a well, which you should be. For the Tormentor himself, the first part is to remember the Tormentor can be suppressed, suspended, or frozen. It's not like other Tormentors where he would just eat through all of that. So in theory, you could use something like Ager's Scepter to just permafreeze him with the Catalyst if you'd like. Also, as mentioned earlier, the div cage allows you to use crits easily on him, so you can use that if you're struggling on the Tormentor. Otherwise, if you're divless, this is where aiming for the chest comes in with precision weapons, or even a Celestial Nighthawk, which actually chunks him quite a bit. I believe at least 50% of his health. That's a big chunk. Dragon's Breath and Shards of Galanor can also put in a good chunk of damage. Just make sure to not blow yourself up in the process. Other than that, just light him up with burst damage and you should be fine. Finally, we're talking about the boss room. First, small tip here, actually 2 tips. Leave the normal red bar Colossus up until everything else is dead. If you don't, then you might start the boss fight while still having a champion up, which will just create chaos for you. Second, make sure all your supers are ready to go. There's no need to rush to start the fight when you don't have to. Now, once the fight begins, it's very simple. You start off with offensive supers and Dragon's Breath, similar to the Meatball fight. Don't pop Tether immediately until the supers are launched. Remember, the Solar Hunter can just throw a knife at the boss for a debuff, and they don't need your Tether specifically for their super. Meanwhile, your Warlock can pop well immediately after for protection and bonus damage for your weapons. Once supers are fired at the boss, you should start spawning in waves of enemies to the field, and this is where you fire Tether so that it anchors onto everything, including the boss, and everything will die to either Dragon's Breath ignitions or additional rocket shots. The main reason to not fire your Tether super early is just to ensure that it lasts long enough to where you will destroy all of the enemy spawns with it, so you don't have to worry about enemies spawning in, and you can just shoot the boss for damage to down him. And from here on, you should be free to just complete the fight, cook the boss's health down to 0, watch for any cheeky tethers he may fire at you, and complete the GM to claim your double loot, and with any luck, a god roll Undercurrent. Before we talk about the elephants, Sneak from the future here. If you're enjoying the video, please consider subscribing today, maybe leaving a like and or comment on the video. It does help, is much appreciated, and it does help with that YouTube algorithm. Now back to the video. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. Sneak, Forbearance is better than this GL. Why should people farm for it? Well, let's put it like this. While Forbearance might be the more complete weapon than this GL, it's not entirely fair to say that this weapon should be completely written off just because Forbearance exists. First off, the vast majority of this game's population does not do raids, which you need to do in order to unlock Forbearance, and then potentially farm the god roll or get it crafted, which takes lots of time. There are tons and tons of people who don't do that, haven't done that, or can't even do it because they don't own the expansion. And yeah, I know we have in-game LFG now, but a brand new in-game LFG feature does not mean everyone in the world will go farm Forbearance overnight and get the god roll. Plus, some people just don't want to do 6-man raid activities. That's their choice. It's like people not wanting to play the awful PvP sandbox. Are you really going to blame them for not playing PvP? Of course not. Now, the other thing to note is that Undercurrent isn't even that far off from Forbearance in quality. Both can roll Ambitious Assassin, both have an arc perk that will clear out hordes of enemies through activating it, except Voltshot in this case can put a chunk of damage onto an orange or yellow bar enemy. Finally, there's the Origin trait. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the Vanguard one is anywhere near as good as Soul Drinker, which just gives you chunks of health on kills. However, the Vanguard trait does give you a form of built-in healing as well, so you're at least getting something out of that in a little bit similar fashion to Forbearance. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's tons of people out there that don't own Forbearance or haven't gotten it yet, or straight up can't get one, and Undercurrent is essentially a baby Forbearance at worst, and a great addition to someone's account at best. Plus, farming out an Undercurrent is significantly easier, unless you're including the 1 week every 2 months or so that Vow of Disciple is the weekly featured raid, and even then, it's not like you can just farm guaranteed drops. You still have to farm quite a bit and hope you get Forbearances to drop during that week. So in conclusion, take advantage of a moderately easy GM, take advantage of the double loot drops, and take advantage of having an easy method of getting a fantastic Arc Waveframe GL. If this video helped, please consider subscribing today, and maybe leaving a like and or comment. It does help the channel grow, is much appreciated, and helps with that YouTube algorithm. If you don't know what to comment, you can just leave Undercurrent as the comment. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.